Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you so much for joining this thematic session on advancing forest-based value chain. We want to make sure that we are not running short of time, so we are starting almost on time this afternoon. I do not want to introduce myself. I have done it a couple of times, so I'm sure we know each other. So thank you so much. As we had yesterday afternoon, we are going to have this thematic session with the same structure of the yesterday afternoon. We are going to have, I will invite in a few minutes the session lead to make his opening remarks, and then the keynote speaker, and then we will listen to the views of the stakeholders who will come here, 3 minutes each, and then after that we will be divided into 4 breakout groups, each to be facilitated by one facilitator for 15 minutes. There are 4 questions, so the facilitator will rotate, and after 1 hour we will finish, and the facilitators, 4 facilitators here and 1 facilitator online, will report back in 2 minutes of the summary of the discussion. And before concluding closing the meeting, the session lead again will wrap up the key points of the discussion. So it's pretty much, I believe, the same structure and procedure that we had yesterday. So without further delay, I would like to invite Mr. Joseph Morel, the session lead, to deliver his opening remark. Joseph is from the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestries of Australia. His focus is on international engagement and cooperation. He has also taken up the lead of Australian international policy, agri chemicals and forestry team. Joseph, please, you have the floor. Yeah, you can go ahead. Yeah.
Hello. Excellent. Thank you, Hussein. Thank you, colleagues. As we said, we're going to be really tight on our time today so that we can keep into the really engaging part of the session, which is talking with each other and addressing the questions that we have. Today's thematic session focuses on how we can strengthen forest-based value chains from sustainable resource supply through to processing, product innovation and market development. It invites us to consider the key developments shaping these value chains, the challenges and trade-offs we must navigate as demand grows, and the measures and partnerships with the greatest potential to accelerate the forest-based economy growth across the value chains. A key feature of forest-based value chains is that they begin with a biological resource. This is what makes the forest-based economy both renewable and fundamentally different from fossil and mineral-based systems. But for the bioeconomy to deliver, the biological input must be both sustained and sustainable. By sustained, we mean it's ensuring that it's predictable long-term fibre availability, stable climate-resilient supply that gives processors, builders, innovators and investors the confidence to plan decades ahead. By sustainable, we mean ensuring that increasing demand for forest products does not compromise biodiversity, carbon stocks, ecosystem health or community well-being. When the biological input is both sustained and sustainable, forest-based value chains become powerful enablers of circularity. This linkage between biological input and circularity is central. For those who were here yesterday, as I touched on in my opening remarks, many aspects of bioeconomy are synergistic with Australia's national transition to a circular economy. Our circular economy framework focuses on minimising waste, maximising material productivity and strengthening end-to-end supply chains, that value add into the supply chain. Forest-based value chains are inherently circular when well managed. The biological resource is renewable and the circular systems ensure that the value is maximised, waste is minimised and the material stays in the economy for longer. We know that global demand for forest products and non-wood forest products is projected to rise substantially by 2050. This demand reflects a broad, swift change towards renewable, low-emission materials. And that includes things like engineered wood, industrial round wood to bioplastics, biomaterials and bioenergy. Many of the examples have been outside in the show. These products are increasingly integral to sustainable development pathways, replacing carbon-intensive alternatives in construction, manufacturing and energy. Meeting this demand, however, sustainably brings strategic challenges. Ensuring sustainable supply requires more than simply expanding fibre availability. It requires smarter, more adaptive systems and innovations that improve efficiency across every stage of the value chain, and stronger partnerships that span production, processing, markets, and policy. Fortunately, today, we have exactly the diversity and expertise in this room to have this conversation. And it's represented well in our keynote speakers and our stakeholder views that we will hear from. I look forward to the constructive discussion we're going to have today and the work as we work collectively to identify practical, scalable pathways to strengthen forest-based value chains and support the growth of a sustainable bioeconomy. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for your insightful opening remarks. Without delay, I would like to, it's my pleasure to invite Ms. Andrea Kotnar. She is professor in the field of food science at the University of Primorska in Koper, Slovenia, and director of the Research Institute InnoRenew. Her work focuses on research projects in the fields of natural science, technology, sustainable development of wood industry, including environmental impact assessment of new materials, products, and technology. Please, Ms. Kotnar, you have the floor.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here and somehow trigger the thinking that you will be then having further when answering the questions. So where to start? Actually, we have been hearing this already from Joseph in the beginning. So we will have to have more supply. And of course, sustainability, innovation, and efficiency could be listed as keywords to be actually addressed in this manner. And if we look back in history, I have here one example from the 18th century from Istria, where I'm coming from, where there were given instructions how to prune the trees in order to use the tree for a certain part of a Venetian navy. So it's something that it's always triggering the thinking how there was patience in the past, and they were working very closely together, forest management as well as the wood use. Today, it's a different story. Maybe it's not so extreme that the robots would be doing all the harvesting, but anyhow, we shouldn't be ignoring the change that happened. We have been hearing about bioeconomy a lot, and what we should not forget is that there is a lot of activities on the research level, and that there is a value of that to go further in these developments. And there is, of course, another one. And this graphic has been published just in December or November 2025, so it's rather new and should be always reminding us that we need to be assuring to be looking at the value chain holistically. So 5 types of innovation that can improve actually the forest-based value chains, and it's technological, social, policy, institutional, financial. And in the other room, Eric Hansen is discussing these key points in the innovation aspect. So we were sharing with one another what we will be discussing. And what he is emphasizing is that it's not just new products, and that we need healthy innovation ecosystem, and that we need more innovative culture, as well that there is a multi-actor collaboration that is needed in order to facilitate the innovation. However, when we are doing innovation and when we are coming up with this value chain developments, what I would like to emphasize is that we shouldn't be only looking at sustainability, but we as a sector, we have the opportunity to be advancing the regenerative sustainability. So not just doing less harm to the environment, but actually doing things that can have a positive impact on the environment as well as society and economy. But for forest-based value chain, how to present it, I'm pretty sure every single one of you was trying to draw it in the past. And just recently, there was this complex figure that was published, and I think it was built by Nature, that actually was the guiding force behind. And when we would go in detail in this material flow in the European value chain, we would be soon saying, yeah, but something is missing. We should also have the loop back in this certain aspect. But one fact is that when we have forest-based value chain, that we are adding additional materials to it. So how to present this now? So where all we are actually incorporating different materials when we are discussing the value chain. And another aspect about the value chain that we do not say it really often, but in 2014 there was a book published where they were nicely presenting that there is not just a material use in the value chain, but there is also value creation in energy use for wood. We shouldn't forget about it. We should also discuss it and incorporate it into our developments. But resources, where does it start? Obviously, we all know it starts in the forests. But since there is such a huge increase demand that we are forecasting, we should be looking into that there is a resource also in old building stock and how to utilize this timber. And there is also quite a bit of resources available in the municipal waste. Of course, this differs between different countries, but the fact is that it's not only forest that we are looking at. At the same time, we shouldn't be forgetting that there is a circularity and cascade utilization, and I believe it's super important that we incorporate social science here, because in Europe especially, we always think about building a building that will last for centuries. We have castles in our minds, but the fact is that design for disassembly and that the needs of a change in the built environment happens every 25 to 50 years. And so what is the key that we can succeed in this fact that the resource should be meeting the growing demand? I would emphasize that the collaboration is a must, so we should be working together. It's a photo from Ushuaia in Argentina, where we were discussing what to do actually with these trees, foresters and the wood scientists. Then we have to assure, there's also from Argentina, Ushuaia, Nire, the wood species, and how to motivate actually the forest owner that will be working with us. So it needs to be somehow value-driven forest owners that we have to be creating. And at the end, obviously, we need to understand the demand, we need to understand the customer and what is the need. However, we have to be learning how to reusing materials from old building stock, which is not a trivial thing to do when the regulations are not allowing us to do so. But on the other hand, we should start learning how to be planning today for the reusing in the future. So design for disassembly, I already mentioned. We have to be also implementing reverse logistic systems, and obviously we have to come up with the technological solutions that will enable us this. But one thing that we shouldn't be forgetting is these other materials that we are adding to the value chain. And this term open innovation is something that I believe is not present enough in our value chains. So here is an example of open innovation, as I call it, is coming here from Austria in collaboration with Slovenia, where the phenol resin is actually used to densify poplar, the low-quality, low-density wood species, and enable the use in construction. Just as an example that open innovation and collaboration with other sectors is a must in order to come up with efficient and innovative uses. But another thing that we cannot ignore, and we have been mentioning it today and yesterday quite a bit, is the digitalization. I would call it Industry 5.0, because it's not only about 4.0, it's 5.0, and here I find it very important that we do the step forward, especially because we have to attract young generations to come and work with us, that we need to enable them work from home and flexible working hours, and I'm pretty sure everyone faced this situation already in today's environment. So we've never, in my opinion, at least in Europe, we never had so many supporting policies that are actually enabling us the advancements in the value chain. And in Europe, it's especially Green Deal, Clean Industrial Deal, New European Bauhaus, and I could be still listing them. And we should take the advantage of this. But at the same time, I strongly believe that we need to preserve the craftsmanship. This is my friend still today in downtown Ljubljana producing the violins completely by hands without any machinery. And we do deal with the material that has a special touch, or we have a special touch with the material. At the same time, we should be updating our educational programs. It's not traditional chemistry, technology, engineering, but we need to be adding aspects of sustainability, digitalization, social science, creativity. And here we have also the need for these lifelong learning aspects, and New European Bauhaus Academy is a new initiative where knowledge, skills, and innovation for the future of Europe, and especially the built environment, is present. That I don't go more into the details, but for the end, I would just say, not only with all other sectors in the technological sense, but we should also be working with creatives, and Mona Lisa with 1 billion euros worth is demonstrated here as like how we can actually add value when we work also out of the box. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kutnar, for your excellent and comprehensive and informative presentation. We really appreciate that you share your thought with us. These are excellent points, and I'm pretty sure that provides a very strong foundation for our discussion this afternoon. Thank you so much. We are now coming to the next part of our agenda for this afternoon, and it's my pleasure to invite the Mr. Labude Popula from African Paris Forum, Mr. Chitan Kumar from International Union for Conservation of Nature, and Mr. Florian Gragsner from International Institute for Applied System Analysis to come to the stage. You will be invited to make your presentation in 3 minutes and share your perspectives. Yes, please. Yeah. And the first speaker will be Mr. Popula. He is Professor of Forest Economics and Sustainable Development at the University of Ibadan, Nigeria, and a specialist in sustainable development. Mr. Popula, you have the floor for 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and colleague, fantastic presentation. We talk about value chain because of survival. There's a mismatch between supply and demand of the products we're dealing with. But it's not just about wood. I observed the presentation made, and it's mostly about wood. In our own part of the world, Africa, excuse me, non-timber forest products are very, very important. They are very ubiquitous. Wherever you go in the communities, you see non-timber forest products for the survival of the people in the rural areas, in the peri-urban and urban areas. And so I think that the discourse about value chain should lean also towards non-timber forest products because of pharmaceuticals, the importance in pharmaceuticals, in culinaries, in even charcoal. Charcoal is so important in our own part of the world. And so why don't we start talking about how we improve the value chain for charcoal production, which is used by a majority of the people in our own part of the world. Now, the discussion will also require some measure of indigenous knowledge and indigenous technology. Some of these sophisticated technologies may not work in some other parts of the world. So I think the discussion should start looking at what are the indigenous knowledge and technologies that we have in other parts of the world, maybe in Africa, and how do we adjust the discussion about value chain to suit what exists in those communities. And there are several examples. We talked about wooden buildings. They have always been there. In our own part of the world, in Africa, can we leverage on the technology that used to be and start improving on them, okay, such that we can now keep pace with what's going on in other parts of the world. Of course, we know there are challenges, so many challenges, issues of policy, are there, issues of financing are there, even issues of governance when we're talking about value chain. And so there must be a process where inclusivity will come into play. Everybody has to be brought on board one way or the other, and so nobody is left behind. Thank you.
Many thanks, Mr. Papula, for your insightful presentation and remark, especially the connection of forest value chain with non-wood forest products and services. Thank you so much for sharing your views. We now turn to our next speaker, Mr. Chetan Kumar. Chetan is the global head of the Forest and Grassland team at the International Union for Conservation of Nature based in Washington, D.C. He has over 27 years of experience conducting research and managing interdisciplinary forestry and natural resources program. Chetan, you have the floor, please.
Great, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and very enriching, last one and a half days. As many of you know, IUCN is one of the oldest conservation organizations with 1,400 members. So what I bring here today is the conservation perspective to this debate. We heard Joseph talking about sustainability. I would like to unpack that. I will start by saying that scaling up or advancing is happening, but more important is how we are scaling it, where it is happening, and whether the ecosystem functions and stability is maintained or not. And from IUCN perspective, it's also important to highlight the fact that biodiversity is not an add-on. It's implicit, it's important in the planning and entire cycle of the value chain. So that's a really important message that we want to get across. I would like to unpack this further by using 4 analytical lenses that we often discuss. The first one is, as I said, it's not about scale, but scale within the understanding of the ecological capacity or the landscape impact. When we talk about value chains, again, we are talking about different contexts. Different countries have different starting points, different preferences. Some are more advanced in understanding, some are less. It's really important, and we have much more kind of advancement in terms of the technology. We have a really fantastic spatial data, GIS remote sensing. We at IUCN, for example, use quite a bit of our STAR matrix, which stands for Species Abatement, Threat, and Reduction matrix, to understand where you could plan your harvesting and how it impacts the biodiversity, what are the landscape impacts, etc. So using more and more of these matrices in value chain is important, which is a good segue to the second point I want to highlight, which was touched upon briefly yesterday, if I understood correctly, was the integration of ecological risk in financial planning. Most of the time we focus on value chain, with the assumption, with the financial planning, that it does not reflect on the, or it does not take into account the biological risk or the climatic risk. We heard about the fire, we heard about the insurance risks. We have the matrices which can help financial institutions integrate ecological risk in calculating the rate of return or investment, return on investment. And it's time that we kind of expand that scope and engage more and more with the stakeholders. So that's another aspect that I would like to highlight, which is where we as an organization are focusing a lot. The third one I would like to focus on is the fact that we talked about the innovation, but innovation discussion often end up about the product and not about the landscape. We also need innovation to increase the resilience of the landscapes. Very good example of the debates, and I was having a conversation with a colleague from UK that how the guidelines for restoration in UK evolved from 70-30, 70 monoculture, 30 kind of mix to 60-40. I mean, these are the kind of innovation where you're increasing the in situ conservation, corridors, and etc. So there's an innovation, need for innovation, including the fact that they need to be resilient or support the resilient landscape. And the last point I'd like to highlight, the point I think Andrea mentioned about the coherence. I think in Europe you have already, but as we all have been discussing, when we are talking about the value chain, we are looking at coherence not just with the biodiversity, climate, trade, and other aspects. And many places we don't have that. So how do we address that? And also about the job creation and skill. You know, we need. Andrea mentioned about having youth brought back or being engaged in the value chain. But we are also looking at what how many in this room can talk about how many jobs are created by the forest sector? We have a data which stands for like 30 million, and that nobody has questioned or looked at how that data has been arrived. So there is a need for much more kind of investigation and supporting this to make economic case at different levels. So I'll stop here. Those are the 4 key points. I said the ecological threshold, integrating ecological risk in financial planning, ensuring that we take into account the coherence as well as the resilience of the landscapes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kumar, for your insightful remarks and highlighting the key points, especially on the explanation and elaboration on the concept of sustainability, as well as where more innovation is needed, as well as the fact that in many places we don't have the coherent policies, and we need really to promote and strengthen those coherent policies. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Now it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Florian Krasner to take the floor. Florian is a principal research scholar with the Biodiversity and Natural Resources Program at the International Institute of Applied System Analysis, and is a visiting professor on land-based CDR technologies with Korea University in Seoul. He is working on integrated global landscape modeling, complemented with sustainable value chain and system optimization, and climate change impact on natural ecosystem. Florian, please, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. So with this bio, my 3 minutes are gone, no? Sorry for that. Okay, so this is the stakeholder intervention, so to say, and I see myself as a stakeholder, A, from science, and B, as an advocate of timber construction for one of the most important reasons, I think, which is helping to save our planet's climate. And I actually have 3 very logical and simple points. Still, we have to consider this. The first thing is we heard a lot about supply and demand. What I think is that we have to put much more emphasis on matching supply and demand. We always think that one size fits all in this case, but the supply and demand situation looks very different here in Austria than if we go, for instance, to somewhere in Southeast Asia or in Sub-Saharan Africa. And we have to be much more accurate here in identifying the right supply chains and come up with innovative product solution in order to match these 2 ends. This is very important from my point of view, and this is one point where science needs to step in and step up, so to say, and beef up. The second point is that we need to support the timber constructing industry, the local, the regional one, and the global one, but by providing them sufficient information and quick information where to get what in terms of products, in terms of capacity, well, information, but also human capacity. With what can I work and how can I ramp up quickly enough decent and affordable shelter in order to have the people there in a safe environment, but also in order to long-term store carbon. Here also the science needs to step in. And the last point is maybe the easiest one, at least it sounds like that. Do we have enough wood in order to supply saving the planet's climate? And I would say here, again, we need to deal with innovative solutions and science needs to help. Because if we think that this forest and construction pump of carbon will work if we have recycling in mind and cascading systems, yes, that's true, but this is by far not enough because we have to keep the carbon in the material as long as possible. And this means in the first place to reuse it again and again and again. And we heard about 500 or 1,000-year-old buildings. This is what we have to be after and not quick and decent recycling. Thank you.
Many thanks, Florian, for your very informative and insightful remarks, highlighting, as far as I got the note, 3 key points: the need for accurate analysis of matching supply and demand in different parts of the world, supporting local timber industries, as well as do we really have enough wood to meet the demand, and in this respect, your emphasis on the need for finding innovative solutions to address these demands and needs. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And thank you for joining this afternoon to this discussion. Many thanks. Now, colleagues, we are coming to the more interactive kind of discussion for this afternoon. As we had yesterday afternoon, we are going to have 4 breakout groups, each dealing with 1 question. And you don't need to move, you should stay where you are. There are 4 facilitators in this room and 1 facilitator for online participants that facilitate the discussion. Each of them, they will address and exchange views with you on 1 question. These are the same excellent facilitators that we had yesterday: Sven Walter from FAO, Yanis Burns from IUFRO, Damiano Silio from Bucco University, and Visha Kuchak from Holzgaster Stira. So I would like to invite them to start their work. Each group has 15 minutes to discuss 1 question, and then I will announce the time for rotating of the facilitator to the next breakout group. Good luck and have a wonderful interactive discussion.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm reporting on the 3rd question concerning issues related to biodiversity, climate and inclusivity. And we addressed several aspects. The question was quite wide, so it was not easy to pin down points, but I would say I will start with first matter concerning governance, and a key point was to secure land tenure, policy coherence, inclusive participation of the communities, especially of women and youth, and create situations that would enable long-term investments and equitable value chains. In terms of then management, we talked about integrated management and investments in the sector with regenerative restoration, agroforestry systems and agricultural systems as an alternative to a reliance on forests, improving the and forest production to reduce the impact on forest land, in terms of surface, and identify incentives, subsidies on public subsidies, but at the same time also incentivize private funding in the sector that will stimulate and focus on these three aspects. And closing the data and knowledge gaps was also another aspect that was highlighted, which has come up already several times today in these days, with comprehensive inventories of species and what the species could then offer, and biomass monitoring, traceability systems, and reliance on local knowledge, and which would then help to bridge science and practice. Then overall, I would like to conclude with the three aspects that came up in all groups that were related to education and research, and that these are key points if you want to address anything related to these aspects. And last but not least, the point that came at the last table was that we already have tools, we already have regulations that can help us address these issues, but if we do not implement them, then not much can happen. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Damiano. Now, Ms. Wisja Kuchak, please. Yes.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you very much. It's okay. So our task was to identify actions and partnerships that offer the greatest potential to accelerate forest-based value chains. Starting from the resource, participants highlighted the importance of the forest ownership and how important it is to motivate them and also show them also opportunities how to manage their forest, especially regarding underused species, the possibilities and opportunities of using underused species, and integration and engagement of the forest owners is very important. To promote bioeconomy as well and to build up the capacity of the forest owners in competences of the bioeconomy and also foster the cooperation with the whole value chain. Then regarding the value chain and processing, participants highlighted that the robust systems ensuring traceability are very important. Also scaling up existing products, also using knowledge of the indigenous people together with the modern innovators in order to accelerate and also to build up the already existing knowledge, but and having also traditional craftsmanships, but also adapted in a modern way. What is also very important to have regulations that protect also rights of the indigenous knowledge, but also of the craftsmanship, and to ensure technology transfer, regional, cross-regional and international. When we are talking about the finance and marketing, what was mentioned is accounting externalities, yes, such as soil erosion and so on, but also supporting robust financing systems in order to also have a risk investment, but also helping to bridging value of that. What was mentioned that easy start, easy run, so very important part to breaking barriers for starting businesses, also to support young interpreters and women as interpreters. It was also mentioned to governments led by example approach, including public procurement as example to develop market and demand, for example, for wood construction. Then, on the topic of capacity building and innovation, important topic of digitalization, artificial intelligence, Industry 5.0, in combination again with the traditional knowledge as a very important, and supporting science-based knowledge, upskilling youth, upskilling women, and upskilling the whole value chain has been highlighted by the participants. When we're talking about partnerships, participants highlighted global, very important global partnerships on the region, on administrative level, but also in the science level and the private sector, but also very much important cross-sectoral collaboration with other sectors like automotive sector or biotechnology and so on. In this direction, engagement and stakeholder partnerships are also very important at every level. So,
thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all for your inputs.
Thank you very much. We have one more colleague, facilitator online, Thomas Simmel, that facilitated the discussion for the online participant. Please, Thomas.
Oh, we cannot hear.
Maybe you are muted, if you can unmute.
Now you should hear me?
Now it's good.
Very good. So at the first question, which strategies and key factors have most effectively driven scalable approaches for a forest-based bioeconomy? I would like to add the fact that the awareness of forest owners, especially small forest owners, has to rise, or has been rising at least. And one key factor that has already been established is the CBE, Circular Bioeconomy Europe joint undertaking. So these private-public partnerships as one clear strategy and key factor to boost bioeconomy. On the second question, which challenges and trade-offs are currently preventing sustainable forest value chains? There is one one statement I'd like to add. Wood is not seen as a high-tech material. So very often it is decorative and so on. But we have problems in getting in touch with these high-value and high-technology applications. This needs to be overcome, as well as land competition and sustainable use, sustainable supply, with a focus on long-life products. For the third question, I'd like to add where we are going to work on measures. On the financial side, the bank credits, which should be available also for small and medium enterprises in the forest ownership and forest wood processing or activities, that's necessary. Then there was a point of which measures could hold the greatest potential. It was foreseen with a question mark, but I just want to raise it here. The biotechnology for forests could have some positive effects, could also gain some problems, and some others which have been already mentioned here, like share the benefits also in the region and try to keep the added value processes in processing of wood and keep these benefits from from processing wood also in the region where it's grown. And for the fourth and last question, there was one thing which has not been mentioned, I think, is which actions and partnerships offer the greatest potential. And there was mentioned probably ecotourism, which has not been addressed so far, at least in my online version, in my online session. And the other ones have been far more or less addressed by the other colleagues. So thank you very much from my side.
Many thanks, Thomas, for summarizing the online discussion. Thank you so much. And again, thanks to all distinguished facilitators and also the participants in different breakout groups. Now, a challenging task for the session lead to summarize the whole discussion for this afternoon. Joseph, I see that you have always been writing and writing and writing. Please.
It is no small task to have tried to summarize what we've done in the last 90 minutes. Just before I get into it, I think I'd like to thank everybody for their openness and respectful discourse that they've had and their willingness to hear different ideas and then to add to them and see how they might be able to be applied in their own unique circumstances. And I'd also like to extend my thanks to the facilitators who have not had a particularly easy job in this World Cafe style of having to restart a conversation every 15 minutes on the same thing, whereas participants got to restart a conversation every 15 minutes on a different thing. So we started off with a really fascinating and in-depth keynote presentation by Dr. Kuttner. And I took a couple of ideas from that, and I want to be clear, some of the ideas here will be reflective of the discussions that came through the thematic session later in. And it is nearly impossible to have captured the 50 ideas that were on every board each time. So I have tried to keep it, to group them together. The one that I got from Dr. Kuttner's presentation was that we can't assume that market maturity is simply going to occur because of a matter of time. There are multiple stages within the value chain that need to be invested in, both with dollars and with time and commitment by people, to ensure that it gets through the various stages. But equally, not everything that starts is going to get to the end. We will find ideas that, as good as they are, aren't ultimately what the market wants to hear. And that came through in a couple of other ideas of the need for the market to be understanding what's available and driving what they need. The need for collaboration, cooperation, notification, and very importantly, understanding the demand of the market has to be what's driving the supply. It can't be the other way around. The need for innovation, it's more than just technological in products. There's innovation in social, policy, institutional, and financial aspects. And one that then came through from the stakeholders' view is innovation in the ecological space as well. So I think there's the 6 forms of innovation there that we need to be aware of. We also need to be planning for the recycle and the reuse of material. And this came through in multiple discussions where we can't just repeat the same mistake that we've done with non-renewable sources like concrete. Steel's a bit more renewable. We can't just produce a pile of wood later that we're then going to burn and release the carbon. We need to be thinking about how the life cycle of the material now. It can be short-lived, long-lived, or reused, but we need to be having that thinking and those conversations now. And we mustn't lose sight of, and this is an idea that came through a lot, the craftsmanship, the historical knowledge, and the traditional knowledge that has existed across the world for what we would now recognize as forest-based bioeconomies. People have been using forest products to make high-quality, valuable commodities. And we should be recognizing that there is this historical aspect. We don't need to recreate everything. We can invest and recognize what has been in existence for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Then we moved on to the stakeholder views, and going through those in no particular order or priority. The value chains that we want to talk about mustn't only be limited to wood. They must include non-wood forest products in all their forms. The last point from the online session about ecotourism is perhaps one that hasn't had as much visibility over the last couple of days. Technology should also not be assumed to be common and equivalent across the globe. What might be available through technological advances in one part of the world may not be possible without change in another. But that doesn't mean that there is traditional knowledge, lived experience, or a common understanding that is a resource that could be leveraged in place of that or with that. Scalability should not be assumed as being equal everywhere. The ecological impact of scalability must be considered during that process. Value adding must include financial arrangements that consider the ecological risk in terms of the profitability assessment as well, or we will not end up with sustainable forest-based bioeconomies. We'll lose that sustainable off the front. We need to match the supply and demand. It's not one size fits all. This comes back to a point again from the online where they want to keep the benefit in the region where it's produced. That isn't saying it can be limited to there, but it should be focused in there. Supply and demand, matching the two things is how it's going to work, and that's what the global trade liberalization of the last 50 years is allowing. Things can move around the globe a lot more easily, but we can also have supply and demand in the local areas. And where possible, we should support local supply chains to understand what is needed, where it's being produced, how long it's going to be in place for, and how things can fit together. That then brings us to the 4 questions. I was hoping that I could distill this down to 1 or 2 ideas, but the room has bested me in terms of the valuable and amazing ideas that you've come up with, so it's a bit longer than I wanted. For strengths and development, the economic trade and liberalisation that exists now is an advantage that we should be looking to take the most benefit from. We can recognise the value of cultural, historical and traditional knowledge. That's an idea that came through in nearly all of the questions. And many of the points that I'm about to raise apply locally, nationally, regionally or transnationally. The data availability and digitisation is a strength that we can draw on, as are the advances in material science that Dr. Kuttner is part of, but there's other ones occurring as well. But importantly, the story of the bioeconomy to drive consumer demand so that they understand what it is that's on the table and what they have and can do for the conversations is important. For the challenges, there is a public, cultural and historical perceptions that wood is not seen as a high-tech or high-prestige item or tool or method for construction or anything else. That we've created a system historically where that is a low-value prestige. That can be addressed. There are regulatory settings that are inadvertently creating perverse outcomes. They're barriers to the system. There's insufficient and inefficient resources and use of those resources. And that can include the creation of silo thinking, where we aren't having collaboration either within the sector or across sectors. We shouldn't be seen as necessarily trying to compete with steel and concrete. We can operate together and will need to in a transition phase. The macro challenges that are essentially outside of one's control, things like geopolitical and climate change, these are real challenges that the system is going to face. And we should recognise that even if our ability to respond to it is somewhat constrained. We need clarity on the supply sources to understand whether it's new or it's going to be reused, and that the workforce within the value chain needs capacity and capability. And then the last 2 are the potential measures and the potential actions. Again, we're coming back to the local knowledge on supply and demand is a measure that can be delivered quickly and easily. We need to continue the research, monitoring and education for the sector. While we have lots of ideas that work now, that can be implemented now, there are future ideas that we can look for and improve and refine. Really, I'm a doctor, my handwriting is atrocious. The governance and policy and the coherence of that, including land tenure, needs to be addressed. These are things that can be done now. We need to improve the forest production and the adjacent agriculture so that if there are, we can clarify what purpose particular land is being used for and maximise the forest use without having to compromise the agricultural needs. Financing should focus on small and medium enterprises, but in areas where the demand is growing. If we're looking at where construction is going to occur, I heard one comment that we should be looking in the developing worlds, in Africa, that's where the population growth is. Across the subcontinent in India, that's where it's going to be. And that that the benefits should be maximised in the region of production. And for the actions, again, forest ownership and clarity on the value that forest-based bioeconomies can provide and the opportunities that exist throughout the chain. Cross-sectorial partnerships, knowledge sharing, both traditional and innovation, trade facilitation, Traceability is one that came through in a couple of the boards about making it clear so that when we're promoting an idea as having a particular ecological or sustainability credential, we can actually back that up. And then the last one, which I touched on, was the exploration of ecotourism within non-wood, non-timber forest products. My apologies, I didn't capture everything that everyone discussed, but that's where we are at the moment. Thank you all.
I should say that indeed you almost capture everything. Thank you so much for the excellent summary of the discussion. And thanks again to colleagues for their time, for their participation. Thanks to the session lead facilitators. Please now go for the coffee break and then we will reconvene in the plenary room. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joseph.
Welcome to this afternoon session. My name is Ewald Rametsteiner. I am also honored to moderate this session with a great session lead, a keynote speaker, and panelists. So we are really looking forward to a very lively discussion also this afternoon with you as the main participants this afternoon to provide your input. That is why this is set up in these circles. As the key participants and active members will be you in these three rooms, three areas. I hope we can distribute so that everybody can provide inputs to 4 questions. The thematic session 8.2 is titled Growing Forest-Based Innovation. We all know how important innovation is. We also know how complex the topic of innovation is to make it happen. To move from a general concept to concrete activities, and this is, I believe, one of those tasks ahead of us today to discuss how we move from the ambitions and the knowledge that innovation is key to discussing the ways to drive advancement of innovative solutions to really drive and scale a sustainable forest-based bioeconomy forward. We also all, I believe, know that there have been very interesting innovations in the past years, decades, that really have advanced the value that this sector can provide. But we also know that a lot of gaps still remain in identifying, adapting, and scaling innovations, because we have very different contexts, we have very different types of innovations that we need beyond the technological, also the financial tools, the policy, the institutional, and not to forget the social innovations that we need to drive emerging solutions at scale. This is what the session is about. We will focus on maybe 3 things mostly: identifying innovation pathways, exploring challenges and opportunities, and ways to foster collaboration to accelerate the adoption of forest-based solutions and innovations globally. The way this session is set up is the same as we had yesterday. So the whole session will be under the formal lead of a session chair, which is kindly covered by Mr. Bata from the government of Japan. Thank you very much for taking the lead of this session. We will hear after her opening words a keynote presentation by Professor Eric Hansen from the US, who will hopefully give us a lot of good ideas of how we can scale innovations, how to think about innovation to make it happen. And then we will have 3 stakeholders to provide their views on key innovation pathways, challenges and opportunities that will also complement the keynote presentation that we will hear. Before we go into the interactive discussion, we have 4 rooms for your interactions. Here we have 1 interaction space online. I hope this works today. And as yesterday, you will be facing 4 questions and providing your input to 4 questions. I hope you have inspiring discussions in the group. And we do, again, as yesterday, we will shift the boards with the facilitators, so you will be able to stay and the questions will come to you. And we hope that the answers to those questions come from you and will be captured by the facilitators. And the facilitators will then immediately report back to you in plenary from what they have gathered from these 4 times 15 minutes discussions. So it is a very short window that you have, plus 1 online group that will be reported back to us. And then we would hand back the floor to formally report from that session back to you to see what we have captured, and then also report after you close the session back to plenary after 2 hours. So we have exactly 2 hours for this task ahead of us today. And if I may, without much ado, I would want to give you the floor. Ms. Tabata is the Deputy Director of the International Forestry Cooperation Office at the Forestry Agency in Japan, of the government of Japan. And you are leading and driving a range of multilateral initiatives on sustainable forest management and wood use in Japan and internationally. Over to you, Ms. Tabata.
Thank you, Eduardo-san. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the session on the growing forest-based innovations. I'm Akiko Tabata from Forestry Agency Japan. I'm pleased to be here with you. I'd like to begin with Japan's perspective on possible key aspects of innovation. Japan has set the bioeconomy strategy, which provides a summary of the direction of the effort to be made under the science, technology, and innovation policy towards 2030. Under this strategy, we are trying to expand bioeconomy markets to solve social challenges, such as environmental, food, and health issues, and to achieve circular economy and sustainable economic growth as well. The forestry sector is recognized as one of the promising bioeconomy markets and is expected to improve its profitability and promote the circular use of forest resources by making efforts to expand wood use in fields where it has not been widely used so far, such as large-scale buildings, and as well as develop new high value-added materials with cutting-edge technologies. So in Japan, about 70% of our land is covered by forests, and our planted forests are mature enough for utilization. Therefore, it is essential to utilize our forest and forest resources in a sustainable way to achieve a bioeconomy and to contribute achieving the 2050 carbon neutrality target. So to achieve this, we are developing biorefinery technologies with Japanese red cedar, which is our unique endemic conifer tree species. And 44% of our planted forests are covered by Japanese red cedar. So we utilize this mainly the timber products, but problem is there are many laminates. So for this whole solution of these laminates, we developed glycol lignin from their laminates and chips. This new material has high flexibility and high heat resistance, so it could utilize diverse range of raw materials, and it could utilize diverse range of raw materials and like high performance plastics. So it is really promising technology for added value, make profits, and it could reduce the use of the existing plastics. And CO2 reduction effect by them has been reported through life cycle assessments. So to advance forest-based innovation, we should encourage addressing social challenges and considering social sustainability through the circular use of forest resources, like Japanese red cedar examples. So to this end, careful attention to social expectation and needs, along with science-based evaluation for providing visible benefits from forest-based bioeconomy. I'd like to emphasize these as a key driver, one of the key drivers of innovations. I'm looking forward to having input from distinguished keynote speakers and stakeholders and participants. So let's get started our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bata, for the opening. And indeed, as you say, maybe Eric, we would give you the floor. Eric Hansen, Professor of Forest Products Marketing and Department Head of Wood Science and Engineering in the College of Forestry at Oregon State University. You're also Deputy Coordinator of the International Union of Forestry Research Organizations Division 5 on Forest Products. And you are co-leader of the UFRFAO Task Force on Scaling Up Science-Based Forest Sector Innovation. So a lot of innovation know-how somehow comes across your desk. So we are very keen to listen to you, to your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ewald. Would you like to escape, or are you going to stay here?
Maybe that's a good idea.
All right, so thank you for the introduction, and it's actually the second time that I've been lucky enough to be introduced by Ewald in just a few months, and so I'm feeling really super special right now, but also kind of intimidated, because if you don't know, in a previous life, he was very much into innovation, so he's really an innovation expert, and he probably should be the one giving the keynote. If I include my undergraduate years, when I was going to school at the University of Idaho, up until now, it's about 40 years of academia. And I was reflecting yesterday that this is the first time that I've ever felt like maybe I needed to apologize for where I'm coming from. So I'll just say I'm sorry and leave it at that, and thank the organizers for inviting me despite the origins here. I also, when I was listening to all of the talks over the last 24 or more hours, I realized that there's really nothing new that I'm going to say that hasn't been said in one of the venues that happened previously, because really they have covered most of the topics that I will cover. But let's talk a little bit about some history first, and this is a bioeconomy meeting in Finland that I spoke at clear back in 2016. And as I was preparing for this, I realized that, okay, I was talking about bioeconomy already a decade ago, and I used this particular graphic, which you can see that I stole from Google Images. And so I thought, well, what would ChatGPT do for this? And so it created this for me. And I thought, this is the sort of thing that people think about when they think about innovation, these new kinds of things popping up. Also just read a press release recently about an original wind farm in Ireland where there were 21 windmills. They just decommissioned it, and they're putting 18 windmills back. And each one of the 18 has the capacity that the whole wind farm had back in 1992. So again, an example of the sorts of things that people think about when they think of innovation. So these were already covered, the objectives of the session, thinking about the key aspects and driving forces and what the potential is, the challenges and immediate opportunities, and that's what is going to happen in these group discussions that we have. But what about the next few minutes here? Oops, sorry. What are we doing? So I want to make sure that we have a common foundation or common understanding of innovation, and that may seem really straightforward and easy to you, but I often in settings ask people to define innovation, and there's actually quite a variety in the definitions that they give, so we want to make sure that we're starting with a good foundation here. I want to capture the context in the forest sector, talk a little bit, at least about my experiences, mostly with a North American focus a little bit, maybe Nordic Europe as well, and just position you to be really brilliant when you get to your group discussions. So if we go back in time a little bit, some of the work that I was doing early on with innovation, we were looking at products, manufacturing processes, and business systems. So these were the types of innovation that we were focused on when it came to manufacturing companies. And what I learned much later was when we were working on the State of the World's Forest 2024, so summer of 23, I was actually debating with FAO people about what are the types of innovation. And I lost. I had to broaden my horizons, and you can see the 5 different types that were also talked about in the materials for this meeting. And the original 3 that I was focused on in my research really all fit under that brown button up there, the technological side. Easy definition of innovation from FAO, doing something new and different, whether solving an old problem in a new way, addressing a new problem with a proven solution, or bringing a new solution to a new problem. And the key factor here to remember is that if it's new to the individual or the organization, it's still an innovation, even if it's something that seems really old to you. So it just is very context specific. So remember that context matters. There's another thing that we need to differentiate, and that's the difference between innovation and innovativeness. And the best way I've ever seen of showing this difference is from a former PhD student of mine from China. And she described it using Chinese characters. So the first one being to create, and then something new. So an innovation is creating something new. It's a thing. But when it comes to innovativeness, create something new, and then we add a new character, and we get to characteristics. And then I'm going to take you full circle to those types that I was using before. What we were really looking at is the innovativeness of the forest sector. And in this case, propensity is really the key word here. So it doesn't matter whether it's a firm or an organization or an individual, innovativeness is about that propensity to be trying things out and to do things differently. I think many of the innovation barriers that exist have been mentioned in the last day and a half, day and 3/4 here. I'm going to talk a bit about sector culture and more on the unsupportive policy regulation pieces than these others, but just realize that there definitely are lots of different barriers out there that keep innovation from happening. We've heard about, in just the last session this morning, about, in this room, this very slow nature of the construction sector. And I think most of the forest sector is kind of right in there with them as far as the slowness. So some of the context, a lot of the work that I've done in the past is qualitative research where I'm sitting across the desk from a manager and asking them about innovation, about their competitiveness, these kinds of things. And the next slide I'm going to show you, it's a question that I ask about what is innovation in your company? So what does it mean? And this person said, we're working with wood, so what is there? So not a very innovative sort of mentality when it comes to their main raw material that they're using. Some other examples from other settings. This culture is incredibly conservative in this industry, so very resistant to change. And then from Europe, I think this whole innovation thing or being innovative is is something that people consider a bit apart from their everyday work. And this is, of course, not the idea. But it's not that research and development of innovation has always been ignored by the sector. And this is going to get very specific to North America here, but just giving you an example from International Paper. If we go back to the late 90s, that company had about 250 research and development personnel on staff. They then acquired 2 other fairly large companies. And those 2 companies represented about 120 R&D personnel, but very soon afterwards, they were back down to 250. And then by 2005, down to 100 R&D personnel, and then by the late 2010s, just very few. This happened similarly with other big companies in the US, where they basically disinvested from the research and development function. And what ends up happening then is that those companies really don't have staff that can talk. They don't have the expertise to talk intelligently with the research institutes and the universities. So it just really reduces their capacity to innovate at all. Oh, sorry, forgot one point. So this was also true for the country of Australia. Heavily disinvested from wood science research and development a couple of decades ago, and just now they're heavily reinvesting in the process. There's innovation hubs, there's lots of different things going on in Australia right now. Taking this very close to home in Oregon, Roseburg Forest Products is one of our big regional companies. So they're $1 billion plus in sales, so not small at all. And in the, say, 22, 23, around in there, they decided that they were going to start doing real research and development. They were actively engaged with the university, and they had these 3 different managers that were very focused on new product development. This was after the kind of the windfall of COVID, because you remember the markets went really bad for a few months, and then they went crazy, and companies made more money than they knew what to do with. And since then, at least in the US, it's really been kind of bad. And so late 2024, the company laid off about 75 or 80 high-level employees, including that whole new product development team. So investment to do new product development, research and development, and then it's gone. I don't know the story about UPM in Finland, but when I was there in 23 at their headquarters, my hosts were telling me in a very excited way about these biomedical plastics that they were producing and how they were the highest margin products that the company had. But then they disinvested from the whole thing just recently. And this press release is from one of their competitors saying that now we've got a real opportunity here because they've left the marketplace. Just like with a biological ecosystem, innovation happens within an innovation ecosystem. And in this case, I've tried to depict a forest sector innovation system. And we are sitting here in kind of the birthplace of mass timber, cross-laminated timber. But in Oregon, it's a fairly recent phenomenon. So we're talking more or less about a decade of development. And so if I think about the innovation ecosystem that existed in Oregon 10 years ago, and it for sure has developed since then, but there were a lot of gaps in this system. So if you think about the red ring there being kind of the foundation that things are built on, and then all of these various actors, that quite often many stars have to align for an innovation to actually be successful. And so in our case, in Oregon, we had a lack of engineers and architects with the right training to be able to design with wood products. We had a real lack of the CAD and CAM expertise that it takes to design and manufacture mass timber for building systems. Really high skepticism about fire performance and insurance challenges that were associated with that. There were multiple attempts to try to create an industry association for mass timber so that they could kind of speak with a common voice and lobby, and that failed as well. So various elements of the innovation ecosystem that weren't really aligning to help that particular sector develop. Despite the gaps, despite the problems, it has continued to develop, and we are building a significant amount of mass timber, especially on the West Coast. How does innovation happen? So with this sector, it's really mostly about the incremental improvements and the adoption from the outside. There are some examples from the radical breakthroughs part. And I think if you walk through the exhibition and you see all of those different materials coming from Finland, you'd think, wow, this is like the most advanced sector on the planet. There's lots of really cool things happening. But maybe that's kind of the cutting edge, the leading edge, and not so representative of the full sector. On the incremental improvements part, especially on manufacturing processes, companies have gotten really, really good at throughput and increasing fiber recovery and reducing waste. So basically using 100% of the tree, et cetera. So there has been lots of innovation. But usually when people think innovation, they think new products. They don't think about all of these other aspects. Policy coherence is something that's been mentioned multiple times, especially in the background documents. And I just want to give you a couple of experiences from my neck of the woods, so to speak. I was at a mill in the US West just in December and talking with the mill manager. And he described the idea that they have reached out to equipment manufacturers. They were ready to invest $30 million in a new saw line. But because they're in the middle of a whole bunch of federal land and federal timber that they can't trust that they'll actually have supply, that they aren't able to make that investment. And this is something that's very common in the US West. To just give you context, in Oregon, the US government owns a little over 50% of all of the timberland. Most of the harvest comes off of about 20% of the land. So those geographic areas that are very focused on federal timberland, even though we need infrastructure and maybe there's people that are willing to invest, they can't trust that the supply will be there. And so the policy just doesn't align for that innovation to happen, essentially. Another area at TIMOs and REITs, so timberland investment management organizations and real estate investment trusts, bit different dynamic between the two, but I think especially with the TIMOs, which have become very common in the US and in other countries as well, what it's done is it's changed the dynamic where those particular investment organizations are short-term focused. They might keep the land for a relatively short time. They're disengaged from the manufacturing side. And kind of selfishly, they're also disengaged from the College of Forestry in Oregon because we typically have had really strong connections to the industry, even through industrial cooperatives where the industry is paying dues every year in order to create the research that helps their operations. But these kind of short-term companies, different focus. So there's various tax and Wall Street reasons that these types of organizations exist, but they aren't necessarily a great recipe for a functional bioeconomy. I think I need to move a little bit quicker here. So that was supposed to transition me into triple helix, something that you probably have all heard of, the idea of academia, industry, and others working together. And just some examples, try to get an example locally with Wood K+, Finland with Luke. I mentioned Australia already. And have to say something about the Oregon Wood Innovation Center, and I'm just going to give you a very quick glance at some products that within the last few years my colleague that runs the Wood Innovation Center has been very involved with in doing the testing that allowed these companies to get these various products commercialized. So the one on the bottom right might be the only company that you'd really recognize, and that's Louisiana Pacific. All right, so some opportunities. We need to enhance forest-based ecosystems and innovation ecosystems, expand access to finance, have those consistent and coherent policies that will allow people to make choices that are based on assurances that there'll be supply, for example, ensure inclusive participation throughout, and increasing the innovation-specific workforce training. And I've tried to describe a little bit the culture of the sector. And I think if we can put these in place, it enhances that innovation culture that can exist within the industry and fast forward innovation. There's a lot of focus on cross-sector and multi-actor collaboration. And I can say that with the cross-sector collaboration, there has not been a lot of huge successes in the forest sector. There's differences in the personalities and the kind of the atmosphere in the companies, and so maybe the oil company and the forest industry company, even though they might start a project, it doesn't quite play out in the end because of the differences in those companies. Wood-based housing, this is an area that I know Austria is very focused on, so I wanted to make sure and emphasize this a little bit. Relatively low complexity, can fit various contexts well, but it does require a suite of innovations, and we heard about this just this morning in this room, which hadn't been mentioned until then, and I was really surprised that it hadn't, but many places in the world, wood-based housing is perceived badly. And so until that particular aspect can be overcome, there's not going to be a lot of progress. So I just wanted to make a plug there on the social innovation side. And then just one more minute. In the other room, Andrea is talking about value chains, and I just wanted to give you a very slight summary here, just so that I can show you that there's some really important parallels here. First of all, she's emphasizing not just forests as a source of raw material, but also municipal waste and old buildings. And the plug I would like to make is that for a bioeconomy, it's not just about forests. There are other sources of biomass, and maybe we should be thinking a little bit more broadly. This partnerships and trust needed around assurance of supply is very consistent with what we've talked about here. The third bullet, not so much parallel, but inclusivity and Industry 5.0 and focus more on the human is definitely parallel. So with that, I think I've come really close to meeting time. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it over back to Ewald.
Thank you very much, Eric. A lot of food for thought, things that need further reflections and discussions. So thank you for setting the scene so well. We would want to invite 3 stakeholders to provide their perspectives on what you have said and their own views on identifying innovation pathways, providing key innovation challenges or addressing key innovation challenges and opportunities that can shape the development. I would invite 3 distinguished stakeholders to come to the panel. Helen Wallace from Queensland University of Technology from Australia. A very warm welcome to you, Helen. Robert Mafsar from the director of the European Forest Institute, and Mia Crawford from the major group of farmers and small landowners that will join here on the podium. I would invite each of you to maybe spend some 3-4 minutes on your perspectives related to key innovation pathways, to challenges, to opportunities shaping the development of the forest-based bioeconomy. If you allow, Professor Wallace, I would give you the floor first. Professor Wallace is the head of School Biology and Environmental Science at the Queensland University of Technology in Australia, and you have actually really set up whole industries, it seems. So we are really interested to listen to your perspectives. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ewald, and thank you for the opportunity to give my perspective. So distinguished delegates, also thank you to Professor Hansen for the presentation that excellently highlights the need for some innovation ecosystems and also highlights, I think, some of the challenges that we have in terms of the innovation culture. So today I want to pick up the thread and I want to talk about innovation from a very different setting on the other side of the world. So we know that Indigenous peoples are custodians of about 80% of the world's forests. And the question I'm going to talk about today is how can we innovate in a way that addresses their realities? And I want to give my perspective from the remote Pacific Island communities where I work and where I've worked for many, many years. So just to give you a picture of these communities, they're subsistence farmers. They depend on agroforestry, gardens, forest foods, and the ocean for survival. So many people in the community don't have secondary education. There's little infrastructure and there's no services. So the places where I work, there's no power, there's no running water in many places. They often have very few ways to generate income apart from selling cocoa, copra, and round logs. The communities live beyond the reach of policy. So the areas where I work, the government has very good policies on sustainable timber harvest and very good policies on value adding, but there's no enforcement and there's no policing and there's no governance. So furthermore, to add to the complexity, these communities have very complex social systems with really difficult internal politics and even more complex customary land tenure. And the end result of that is that because of these complex ownership structures, sometimes only a very few people benefit from the timber harvesting. And it's often the women who bear the consequences of the unsustainable logging. So what will happen is a few people in the community will get the benefits and the women will get the consequences, which is they lose their water supply, they lose their timber, their food trees, and they lose their forest medicines. So, and I was struck by some of our conversations over the last few days of how similar this seems to be in other parts of the world. Furthermore, the timber will leave the country as round logs. Even though there's a value-adding policy, there's very little value-adding and there's no ways to create employment. And there's also no ways to trace where the timber ends up. So that's the challenge of the sort of communities where I work. So the question for me is how can we innovate in ways that address the needs of these communities? And I'll give you some experiences that we've had in a very small scale. So one of the ways that's worked for us is to find the local innovators in the communities and work with them, the private sector, the micro-enterprises, the small businesses, and empower and enable those innovators inside those communities. So I'll give you an example. I've worked mostly in non-timber forest products. Globally, this tends to be women's work. So what we do is we look for the entrepreneurs in these communities. These will be, for example, women that sell value-added cookies into local markets or women that do very small-scale value-adding. And what we do is then we try to take the risk out of the value chain for them. So we support them with things like market research, we support them with technical knowledge, and we might co-invest in infrastructure with them. And so these are all the same principles that we heard at the finance session yesterday at a very large scale. So I'm not talking about billions, I'm talking about a few $100s or a few $1,000s at most of co-investment. So we might co-invest in an oven, for example, to help the women to bake the cookies better, or we might help them to source good packaging so that they can sell their product into the local supermarkets. So what we do with that approach is we take some of that innovation risk, we take the risk out of the value chains for the innovators. And what this is, the end result of this has been that we've got thriving businesses that are still there and growing when the donor funding finishes. So these local innovators, because they live and work in the communities, they become powerful agents for sustainable change in those communities because they understand the culture and they understand how to work with and around the barriers. So I guess my key message is to consider not just the partnerships in innovation and what we need to do, but also consider co-design and co-design with those smallholders, those forest-dependent communities, and consider their needs when we're innovating in ways that are going to have real impact for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, that is a very important complementary perspective, which a lot of the countries that we work in face similar situations and need similar solutions, so a lot of new perspectives here. We would now turn to you, Robert. Thank you for coming here. You are the director of the European Forest Institute. Under your leadership, this institute works on a lot on the science policy interface, and you yourself, you have a lot of international experience, including in forest research and innovation, the bioeconomy and ecosystem services, and bio-based models for businesses on forest-based products. We are really keen to listen to your perspectives. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you very much, Ewald. Ladies and gentlemen, listening to Ewald reading this, I would really want to hire that guy. So I don't know, somebody really did a good job on my bio. With that said, I see that the window of innovation is getting smaller and smaller during the meeting. A lot of things have already been said, so it's really difficult to say something new, and especially since I don't bring any examples from faraway Pacific islands like you did. So I hope you can bear with me the next 2 or 3 minutes. So I believe that we saw today by Eric presenting that the forest sector is relatively conservative. I think that we all are living through that thing, but I think that the forest sector can no longer afford to be conservative. I think the changing world and the environment around us, being it the ecological pressure of climate change, decreasing biodiversity, disturbances that are hitting our forests, the economic opportunities or challenges that we are facing with changed, let's say, global markets and perspectives, or the social expectations that we are looking at, I think that just staying at the status quo is no longer a neutral option, but it's a risk that we are taking on if we are not changing a little bit our attitude towards innovative approaches. And when I'm talking about innovation, innovation is needed so we can adapt. We can adapt to these changes that I'm saying. And I think that innovation is also not something static. It doesn't happen once and then you keep doing and calling it innovation, but it's a reiterative process that requires consistent prototyping, so to speak. In the terms of design thinking, it would mean that you're every time re-evaluate what you're actually putting forward. And this needs to happen throughout the whole value chain. It's not only a question whether we build more in wood, whether we create fantastic wood-based materials. It's a question also how do we address other elements. You can see that forest managers are struggling to see what to plant next, what to do with their forest, how to manage this forest. We are struggling to develop strategies how the forest should be managed, how much used, how much carbon should be stored on sites, how much should it be stored in the product. So all these big challenges do require that we look throughout the value chain and hopefully also connect different actors within this value chain and horizontally to other sectors. Because even though we innovate, it won't necessarily happen that others will accept our ideas and just blindly implement them. So I believe that in that sense, what is needed is a systemic transformation. I think that this is nothing new. We all heard it. I think it's much more difficult than to actually practically implement it. And therefore, this type of events, like we are doing them here, are so important because really this collaboration, exchange of examples is really a very good motivating factors, I believe, for all of us. But one element that I think should be not underestimated, and we all a bit do, is what happened this morning when it was talking about communication. I think this is where our sector needs the most innovation. Because very often, even though we are delivering, in our opinion, fantastic products, we are delivering solutions that will make the world better, more sustainable, we are still perceived as the ones basically killing the forest and destroying the environment. There is very, very low understanding, a very, very low acceptance of the innovative products or practices that we are putting forward. I mean, it's not only about codes, whether the codes are adapted or not for more wooden buildings, it's also whether the people want to live, what you said, in such buildings, whether they don't feel that living in a wooden building is actually harming the nature. So I think that this is also one of those elements that we have really, really to innovate and to see how can we reach out with new ways, new words. Bioeconomy and circular, sustainable bioeconomy are certainly not words that are helping in that respect, but we might need to find a new storytelling. And in that sense, I'm very happy that today Tabata-san was opening this session, because in Japan, as much as I know, selling a product is a different thing than selling a story. You can sell a story, but you cannot sell a product. And this is very often where European companies fail in entering the Japanese market. And I think we should all learn a little bit more from that approach, where it's very funny to hear hundreds of years ago, Japan stopped wooden buildings because they were destroying their forest. If you read this book, End of Civilization by Jerry Diamond, but now obviously they are trying to get it back. So I think innovation is also a circular element where traditional knowledge and traditional practices can come back in a renewed way. And I think in that sense, the innovation is maybe the key driver that should drive our sector in the future. So thank you very much for this, and yeah, hope I added something.
Thank you very much, Robert. Yes, it's beyond the technicalities of it. It's really the perception and the innovation culture, both in the sector but also the acceptance by society. Indeed, Ms. Crawford, thank you for joining. If I may give you the floor as the EU and International Affairs Forest Director of the Federation of the Swedish Farmers. You're also very active in the international space, including as the leader of the major group on the coordination mechanism for the International Arrangement on Forests, and as the Farmer and Small Forest Landowners Federations within the UN Forum on Forests. So you present a lot of voices of those that are to whom forests are very dear, but they also have to make a living from it. And I'm looking forward to how you frame that perspective now in your intervention. Over to you.
Thank you, Ewald. Very long name, that coordination mechanism. We have to work on that. I'm very happy to be here this afternoon. I'm come from a family of forest owners in the west part of Sweden, where we have managed our forest for generations. Half of the Swedish forests are actually owned by families like my own family, and 39% of these forest owners are women, which is quite unique. And 68% of farmers also own forest. It's like the backbone, our security for our work. But I think wherever you are in the world, by nature, farmers and forest owners are creators, inventors. We are the doers. We have to invent, we have to find new ways, quite often out of reality and necessity. So that's like in our DNA, to be inventors and to grow forest-based innovations. I would like to thank the COLI partners for inviting me to give this insight, for Eric for framing the issues, and Helen and Robert for your insight. But I also like to really thank UFRO for putting together these policy briefs. I think it's worth an applaud. You have done a fantastic work bringing these together in a short format. So this will be very helpful for our discussion, but also carrying COLI spirit further. So Sweden is actually one of the highest ranked countries for innovation in general, not just forest-based innovations. And I'd like to share some of the reasons why, because I think this will help also our discussion. Well, first of all, education, knowledge, research, and equality, they are the foundations that give us a highly skilled workforce, well-equipped to solve problems and build a culture of innovation. And the Swedish agricultural science is actually ranked one of the very best agriculture and forestry research universities. And one of the things that I'm really, really proud of with this university is that 20% of all of its research being published is co-authored by researchers in developing countries. And I think this is something, for me, this is real international cooperation at its best, when you have this sharing of knowledge. So I think this is actually one of the key and foundation for being a country of innovations. The second is co-creation. Eric talked about this triple helix, and I think we are a small country and we have to pull together, working together in partnership, government, businesses, universities, but also stakeholders. And the kind of structure that I'm most familiar with is in the north of Sweden. It's a cluster of forest technology. And it's so inspiring to meet all the partners there, how they transfer knowledge, being very transparent and open about co-creating together innovations for the benefit of the whole region, actually. And so these hubs, incubator labs, networks, it's a safe space for growing innovations, and I think that's one of the reasons. The third reason, I think, is we have a strong democratic values. Free thinking, transparency, and the freedom to try and also sometimes to fail. And that is a competitive advantage, I see. Openness breeds pioneering ideas, and stability builds trust. And these are the enabling environments you really need for long-term growing forest-based innovations. And then I want to give you a concrete example of an innovation that I'm really, really proud of. It's close to my heart because it's what I'm wearing. You've seen outside textile being done by forest. But this is a unique product because it's a combination of reusing textile waste, combining it with forest residues. So I think this is what I would like to say, really the opportunity moving forward. The forest-based innovation really needs to solve the problems in other sectors. That's when we really become super powerful and we grow forest innovation that can have an impact on society at heart. It's called Once More, so check it out. It's developed by a cooperative in the south of Sweden, Södra. And they are a member of our federation. We're very proud of this development, trying really to tackle not just the use of forest residues, but also the textile waste. Moving forward, I think it's really important that forest stakeholders are not just consulted, but we are considered as co-creators, and most importantly, always uphold fair and equitable sharing of benefits from forest-based innovations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia. Thank you very much. That, together with the keynote, I believe, really has set up a very nice frame in which we work. There are a few commonalities that you can hear, and there are certainly more. But one is around innovation culture, something that is set as positive. The other one is co-creation. We've heard it a couple of times. This openness to work on solutions that are broader societal solutions. Yet, while the innovation concept is very complex, it has many dimensions from technological to something else, but there are a few commonalities that we possibly can push forward to work on. And with this, I would really thank you once again to setting the stage so well. We would then move to the next step, but not before we give you an applause. Thank you. So now it's enough to make the best out of the input that we have. We have 4 groups here in the room, and we have 1 group online to discuss essentially 4 questions, each of you. The first one is recent accomplishments and successful strategies. Please share them. The second is current barriers hindering large-scale uptake. The third one is low-hanging fruits for upscaling. And finally, priority actions required to fully tap into these opportunities. So we have 4 distinguished facilitators here in the room with us today. Lisa Lehner from Austria, covering this group. Thank you very much, Lisa. Nelson Grima from UFRO with this group. Tai Linares for this group here, and then Peter Meyer from the BFW for the 4th group. And then, of course, we also have an online participant group that will be facilitated by Martin Hosner from Bioeconomy Austria. I hope it works today. I see you online. Martin, thank you for the online group. 12 to 15 minutes, then I would please call the facilitators to move. You can stay, you will face another question. You will have a couple of seconds to recalibrate of what the task is and provide your input. With that, please, without further ado, please get in position and let's start the work. Thank you. Thank you so much for your input. Also, really thank you, the facilitators, for diligently working to get all of your ideas on paper. They will now be challenged to really, within a couple of seconds, summarize the main findings ad hoc of very colorful results. Yes, I very much encourage interim applause. We certainly will also give them an applause at the very end, but thank you so far. Lisa, as soon as you are ready, we will go with Lisa on question number 1. If you manage to provide a quick overview in 2 minutes on your findings on question number 1. Maybe you can repeat the questions so that we refresh our memories what the task was. Over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Ewald. You can see that we have a lot of input, but I will turn it now so I can read it also. Our question was, which recent innovations have successfully advanced sustainable forest-based bioeconomy approaches? Very interesting questions, I have to say. And the answers were quite vast, a lot of diversity here. Also, of course, when you think about wood construction, CLT, joint solutions, fire safety evidence that is supporting wood construction innovation, innovative regulations also on that topic. But then also we had a lot of, I would say, Renaissance topics. Yeah? We discussed weaving or fermentation, for example, that are very old techniques but are now being redesigned or have a kind of renaissance now. We also talked about social innovations, for example, cooperatives, federations, or also, where is the one that I liked? Female-led social innovation, since women are growing in the forest sector, are getting more active there. Digitalization, of course, you know, those broad topics, when you think about drones or just starting from the forest sector, really tree breeding, genetically modified. Of course, it's also connected. Whew, I'm speaking so fast because I only have 2 minutes and it's so many things. But yeah, I want to say thank you very much for all that input and all those different ideas. It's good to know that so much is out there.
Excellent. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much. A big applause to Lisa and the group, all of you. And we would move to facilitator of the second question, Nelson. The floor is yours. Here's the microphone, and maybe also you would give us the question to start with.
Thank you.
Also very full plate that you have. 2 minutes.
Yeah, it grew some wings on the sides. The question was, which factors currently prevent the large-scale implementation of sustainable practices in the forest sector? And here, of course, I cannot go through each one of the ideas that were presented, but something that came up again and again is that there is a general lack of awareness on the consumer side or on the markets in general of the potential of the forest products. And this drives a lack of willingness to pay some extra for getting a sustainable product instead of a plastic fork, for example. Other things that came up was lack of coherence in policy. This is a general idea that is not exclusive for this question, but I heard it again and again during these past couple of days. Then there were also ideas related to the technology and the practices, that technology is not being used to its full potential. And this drives lack of implementation that is only due to not knowing how to implement the technology well enough. There were also comments regarding prices. Prices are not driven by the actual expense of collecting the forest products or cultivating the forest products. These prices are driven by the market, and sometimes having the competition of fossil-based products, it's not possible to reach those prices coming from a sustainable product coming from the forest. There were also comments regarding the lack of general skills and engineering knowledge regarding this type of products. And this expands to the idea of lack of education in general within or towards the forest sector. There were also concerns about the lack of standardization of practices and regulations. There were concerns on the implementation of practices at global scale may not be the most desired thing, because there are practices that are only preferable at a much smaller scale, even local scale. So we should not aim to apply everything everywhere. And of course, there were many other ideas, but there is no time for that. I hope you got a sense for it.
Thank you very much, Nelson, to this group number 2, or question number 2. Thank you. Thais, would you be ready for question number 3?
Thank you, Akiko.
Go ahead.
So yes, it will be a challenge, but let's try in 2 minutes. So our question was referred to the low-hanging fruits. So what are the most promising short-term innovation opportunities in the forest sector that can be rapidly scaled up to enhance the forest-based bioeconomy? So we had quite a variety of suggestions here. I clustered them, so we have some inputs on products that could help to quickly advance the forest-based bioeconomy. So pulp derivatives and lignin, fuels, bioplastics, etc. Wood construction, packaging, also building on non-wood forest products. We also had another cluster related to remote sensing, all data tech products that can shorten access to information, AI-based applications. We have another set of suggestions related to markets, and in particular to payment for environmental services and carbon markets. So how these markets could upscale the adoption of innovation. Regulatory innovation has been seen as a very powerful tool. Platforms for knowledge sharing, but also platforms for business to business, connecting growers to consumers. Plant genetics, also to shorten rotations and climate adaptation. Research, more research on sustainable fast-growing species to increase community income. Something that came up also very strongly is the building on local markets opportunities, local and regional markets, also on the willingness to produce and consume locally, but also identifying certain innovations, some product innovations with communities, because there is this cultural aspect. Using more waste, using all parts of the trees. There is plenty of available technologies there for that, and working more with communities, building on traditional knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thais. A lot of opportunities, it seems. That is great to hear. And inspiring ways forward. Peter, for question number 4.
Yes, now finally all you always wanted to know about innovation. No, this was the question about collaboration. Which collaborative efforts between stakeholders are needed most to create the conditions that support the expansion of forest-based innovations and accelerate this transition? So really about what are the factors for successful collaboration. And what we've been discussing a lot is trust and also vision. So I think these are two very important elements that you need for collaboration and for success in innovation. And that can have different frame conditions that you need for this trust. You need a safe space sometimes to discuss pre-commercial developments. I think that is very true and a very successful model. Sometimes you need also to develop standards, then you can invite different interest groups. We've been discussing that, civil society, to formulate certain rules or guidelines, standards, which you will follow when it comes to innovation. Sometimes you need national strategies, you need the government. This depends very much globally on where you live, what your system is. Sometimes you need co-creation systems on a local level. We've heard the example of women in one of the speeches at the beginning. So you need to create own systems that are subsystems to the country that you live in to be effective in innovation. So again, it's not one size fits all. There are certain parameters that are very important for success, but it can vary from private initiatives to classic sector initiatives. We've heard about the sawmills, the forest owner, and the research. That's a classic way. Research industry, that's all models that work, but it can be more complex and depending on your circumstances. I leave it with that. Thanks very much for the contribution and for all your insights into innovation and collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you. This was 4 groups from this room. Today also the group that was online actually made it happen. Thank you very much for all of those that have engaged. We have Martin here on the call. Can I give the floor to you, Martin, to report from the online group? You have the floor.
Of course you can. So our online group decided to go for all 4 questions. So you're getting really the full package from us. And what emerged very clearly is that innovations are already out there. From mass timber, we talked about laser scanning, to policy platforms and novel forest crops like the Macauba palm in Brazil. The problem is not the ideas, it's the ecosystem around them. So companies are just too small, financing gaps are too big, and regulatory frameworks are lagging behind. So the good news is that participants see concrete short-term opportunities in sustainable wood construction, in green public procurement, and especially or also non-wood forest products value chains. So to get there, we need innovation systems that genuinely connect researchers, the industry, communities, and also finance, and public-private partnerships that are willing to share the risk. So in one sentence, the forest sector is full of innovation. What it needs now is the collaboration and finance to scale it. Yeah, back to you, Ewald.
Thank you, Martin. That was very nicely summarized. Excellent, excellent. So we are closing the part when you all had a lot of work to do. That is what we harvest today. Let us really also, for the online participants and you in the room, give one more applause to all of us. And then we would hand over to you.
Thank you, Eduardo-san. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the facilitators for facilitating this discussion and sharing the key messages. So I noticed some keywords like cross-sector collaboration, co-designing innovation, collaboration, and cooperation. And most impressive word for me is the co-creation. So relating these keywords, I'd like to share effective cross-sector coordination or collaboration for promoting wood use from Japan. So Japan enacted the Act for Promotion of Use of Wood in Public Buildings in 2010. It facilitated the use of wood in public buildings like hospitals and schools. So following this law, we set the cross-sector coordination platforms with several ministries. By cooperation with Ministry of Education, which has a responsibility for public school buildings, almost 80%, the 79.2% of newly constructed public schools facilities adapted wooden structure or wooden interiors in 2024. And through collaboration with the Ministry of Infrastructure, the temporary housing in case of emergency like earthquakes and wildfires. So wooden temporary housing were provided. The increase of number of the temporary housing. So it is the flexibility and warmth of wood is their, how can I say, is the advantage of this housing. So, and devastated wildfire in 2025, all temporary housing were made of wood. So, thanks to such cross-sector collaboration, the wooden construction rate of low-rise public buildings, it means 3 stories or lower, it was increased from 17.9% in 2010 to 30.6% in 2023. gradually. So, and the act was revised and the focus is expanded from public building to general buildings in 2021. So cross-sector collaboration or co-creation, these are the key of the innovation, I think. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your active participation. I'd like to back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bata. That formally closes this session. We have around 30 minutes before we would reconvene in plenary. There is a coffee. Mr. Bata will report on that session in the plenary. I think it was really, really rich. There are many ideas, there are many innovations. There is a lot of input on the what, there's a lot of input on the how. It is also clear that this is a lot about an innovation culture that is open, solving problems of the society, the problems of the planet, and that we can do this together. In many ways, we have to do this together, and we can learn from each other a lot if we just share, including in these types of contexts. Thank you very much. Let me just remind ourselves that we had a keynote speaker. We had 3 panelists to provide input to the discussion, and then we had 5 fantastic facilitators that helped us shape this under the lead of the government of Japan. Thank you very much for all of you. Not to forget the online group and the technical support. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to our afternoon session. I think our last plenary dealing with thematic sessions. So we had 2 sessions running parallel again this afternoon. And the first session that we're going to hear from is on advancing forest-based value chains. That was held in room 8 with Hussein being the facilitator and Joseph as the lead, as the session lead. I think before I hand over to him to just give us an overview of what was discussed in that room, I just probably have 3 things that I want to just highlight, which were sort of, that came through to me. Yesterday, we had a discussion when we were talking about finance, and there was an issue raised about gender responsive financing. And in today's session, there was an indication that actually China is already doing that. So which means that even though in some areas of the world, some things are still a challenge, in some areas there are already solutions. And that leads me to the second issue, which I have termed as there are different dynamics in different countries. One is the one I've just spoken about in terms of financing, but the other one is in some areas there are things that we see as challenges, but in the same challenges that are seen in those countries, the other countries would see them as opportunities. So for instance, if you look at things like the availability of data, some countries have that data available and have assimilated in that data, but when you look into other countries, they struggle with the collection of the data and they're still wanting to have an opportunity to do that. And then lastly, there was an issue about artificial intelligence that obviously we didn't have time to really unpack in the groups. And the indication there was, even though it is seen as an opportunity for some of the sectors, it could be challenging for some of the sectors like forestry, because if you then introduce a lot of that, it has a big impact in terms of employment. And obviously you would want to make sure that people are employed, especially that you have a lot of youth that is qualified, that is coming through. And if now you replace everything with technology or with robots or whatever, then you reduce the ability that they can be able to get employed even though they are highly qualified. So let me hand over to you, Joseph, to just take us through what the participants were able to pick up in the session. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So the session was advancing the value-adding in supply chains. We started off with a fascinating and enlightening keynote speech from Dr. Kuttner, who highlighted that market maturity cannot be seen as only occurring over a matter of time. There will be multiple stages beforehand that require investment of time, people's resources, to be able to achieve the market security and the market maturity in the value-added chains. And within that, we need to look at aspects of cooperation, collaboration, and information sharing that allows an understanding of the demand. We can't just assume that if we build it, they will come. This isn't just a supply-side conversation, it's a demand-side conversation as well. And that idea and a few others, like the use of knowledge, came through repeatedly and strongly in the session. The next one was that innovation isn't just about products. Innovation occurs in social areas, policy, institutional and financial systems, and equally in the ecology and ecological systems as well. So innovation shouldn't only be seen as the development of new commercial or consumer products. We need to consider early on the ultimate fate of the products that are produced through a forest-based bioeconomy. What's the intention for reuse, recycle, or are they ultimately going to be destroyed? Are we going to be producing waste? It's important to have those conversations now rather than create the same problem we have with the current building construction materials later on down the track. It also then goes to, if we're suggesting that forest-based materials are able to sequester carbon, that's only true to the extent that we don't then destroy the material that's sequestering the carbon. And the last one from Dr. Kuttner's speech that came through very clearly and again was repeated throughout the session, we mustn't lose sight of the craftsmanship and the historical expertise and traditional knowledge that has existed for centuries, if not thousands of years, where these systems have been based on established sustainable forest bioeconomies. The example that was presented was the craftsmanship for fine instruments, but that's only the example that was there. This idea of fine craftsmanship and traditional knowledge exists across the world, and there's no need to throw that out in an attempt to only look at new technologies. We then had 3 very interesting and insightful presentations from stakeholders, and 6 ideas came from that. Value chains should be looking at both wood and non-wood forest products. Again, a repeating idea through many of the discussions. Technology should not be assumed to be uniform or common across the globe, and there is an opportunity to use traditional knowledge and lived experience to leverage what technologies are there or while technology is transitioning and transferring to where it's needed. The scalability should not be assumed to be ecologically sustainable. Scalability in a particular area must be considered for the unique circumstance that is there, and biodiversity is an add-on, should not be seen as an add-on. It's essential to the ecological consideration. Value adding must include in its financial considerations the ecological risk so that decisions can be made on profitability with the full set of information. It's important that we match supply and demand. Again, this idea keeps coming through. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's a complex and nuanced discussion. And in those discussions about supply and demand, we should be supporting local supply chains to understand what is there, where it can be produced, and where it's going to transition from one place to another. And then we had the breakout sessions with the 4 questions. The first one was what areas exist currently and that have developed, that have been supporting the value adding. The ones that came through very clearly for me and for the discussions was the benefit and the value from the economic and trade liberalisation of the last 50 years. It's now a lot easier to move material around the world and for markets to be developed. there's a need and the value of recognition of cultural, historical and traditional knowledge that's coming through far more clearly in the last decade and still has a long way to go. The increasing use of data and digitalization, the advances in material science, and the potential for those advances to be disruptive to established networks. New ideas can come through that will change conversations. The need for global discourse and global conversation are developments that are occurring, of which this summit is a key example. And the one that I think, when we lead back to the beginning of the day, the story of bioeconomy and the story of forest-based bioeconomy is to drive consumer understanding and demand. The next one was what challenges exist to it and to increasing the value add in supply chains. Public, cultural and historical perceptions where wood is not seen as a high-tech or a high-prestige material. Regulatory settings that are having perverse outcomes that are actually detracting from sustainable forest-based bioeconomies. Insufficient and inefficient resources and use, including silo-based thinking. The macro challenges that are largely outside of control in relation to geopolitical and climate, amongst other things, but those are challenges that a forest-based bioeconomy is going to need to address. Clarity on where supply sources are and whether they'll be new or reused, and the workforce capacity and capability. As the supply chain increases and advances, we're going to need trained and capable workforce to deliver on the demand that should be possible. And then we had two questions about what are the potential measures and the potential actions that already exist that we can use. Again, the local knowledge on both traditional and on what supply and demand is possible in the area was one point that came up. The need to continue research, monitoring and education in the value chains all the way through was a strong one. Governance, policy, coherence and land tenure was an idea that came through both here and in potential actions as well. The need to target financing on small and medium enterprises, as well as targeting that finance in the areas where the demand is going to occur. And where possible, the benefits from a value-added chain should be retained in the region of it, so that those people who are participating in it can see the benefit from it throughout the process. And lastly, Chair, was the potential actions that could be in there as well. And this is where forest ownership and making it clear to the owners of forests the opportunities that can exist in a forest-based bioeconomy and the opportunities that exist for them to be engaged through the value-adding steps as well. They're not just the source of production, they have abilities to input and be constructive all the way through the chain. The need for cross-sectorial partnerships, and that is across, even into the areas where we're trying to compete, the need to engage the construction industry to talk across the sectors, not just within, led us to conversations about knowledge sharing, both traditional and innovative, and not just knowledge sharing, knowledge transfer. It isn't just enough to sit there and talk. There needs to be ways to make sure that knowledge is embedded in the other person, in the other side of that conversation. We came back to trade facilitation as a possible action, the needs to be able to move things around the globe and to better transfer materials is really sound. If we're going to suggest that forest-based bioeconomies are sustainable, we need to be able to prove that. So traceability and systems for that are essential to match the promises that we're making to consumers. And the support for youth and women to enter this sector and in the small and medium enterprises around the world to have a much greater control over their future and their individual sovereignty is essential as well. And that then came back to collaboration. And a last point that perhaps was raised that hadn't been discussed much over the last 2 days was ecotourism as a non-timber forest product. We're focused on consumer materials, but ecotourism was considered maybe an idea that hadn't had as much visibility as it could have, Chair. It was a very productive discussion, and I do thank the room for a wealth of information.
Thank you, Joseph. Now let's turn to the second group. I joined the session Growing Forest-Based Innovation. It was moderated by Ewald and led by Akiko. Professor Eric Hansen gave a keynote paving the way to a very rich discussion and exchange on key aspects of innovation as a driving force and on challenges and immediate opportunities for innovation. So there has been a lot of discussion and good exchange, and just to share with you some inspiring takeaways I will take with me is innovation is about creation. Most innovation is needed in communication. You can sell products, but you can't sell stories. Innovation is also going back to tradition, build a culture of innovation, and key of innovation is cooperation and partnerships. So these are just some inspiring takeaways which I would like to share, which I wanted to share with you, but much more you will find out soon. So the floor is yours, Akiko. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So distinguished participants and co-chairs, I wish to offer the summary of our session. So in the opening, I shared Japan's perspective on innovation. To advance the forest-based innovation, we should encourage addressing social challenges through the circular use of forest resources. And then we had the keynote speaker from the Professor Eric Hansen from Oregon State University. He started from common understanding of innovation, of its definition, types, and he mentioned insight on advancing innovation and its opportunities. And then we will have 3 distinguished stakeholder speakers. The Professor Helen Wallace from Queensland University of Technology, Australia. So she mentioned about her experience of empowering local innovation and co-designing innovation with women. And the second, Mr. Robert Mapsall from the European Forest Institute. He pointed out innovation is not optional, it is imperative. And he encouraged the systemic and adaptive way of the innovation with collaboration. And last stakeholder, Ms. Mia Crawford, UNFF Major Group Farmers and Small Landowners. She stressed the global opportunity to scale forest-based innovation co-created with stakeholders and calls for inclusive, equitable sharing of its benefits. And then we will have breakout group discussions. I'd like to share the key point of the guiding question. So, question 1, recent innovation. So we raised renaissances of traditional knowledge and method through redesign. Technological advancement through digitalization, and institutional and social innovation through creation of cooperation, and development of new materials, and innovation supporting wood construction. And second question, factors currently prevention of the innovation. General lack of skills and education related to the forest sector, and lack of the coherence and coordination in policies and financial instruments, and lack of consumer awareness regarding forest-based products. And question 3, the most promising short-term innovation. 1, readily deployable technology and products, and all remote sensing, data-based and AI-based technologies, and innovative communication tools, and innovative regulatory frameworks to create new markets and unleash market potential. So these are the short-term innovation. And lastly, collaborative effort between stakeholders, a needed collaborative effort between stakeholders. Trust is essential for effective collaboration and innovation. And developing a vision and brand for innovative wood-based products, and active emotion-oriented communication is needed. And lastly, cross-sector collaboration and public-private partnership as well as needed. So, in conclusion, I'm pleased to report that the session serves to deepen our mutual understanding of the importance of co-designing innovations for advancing sustainable forest-based economy. This will entail continued co-creation efforts among stakeholders across sectors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Akiko, for that presentation. It does sound like there was a lot of activity in that session. From the floor, are there any points that the participants would like to raise? Okay. Sylvia. Okay.
Yes, good afternoon. I have a short but important information to share. We opened the COLI event this morning underlining the importance of communicating more and better. And I'm very happy to tell you that tomorrow the joint statement of the private forest sector to this global summit will be officially released. This statement is supported by the Advisory Committee on Sustainable Forest-Based Industry, statutory body of FAO, the International Council of Forest and Paper Association, focal point of the United Nations Forum on Forest, and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development Forest Solution Group. With this statement, the private sector wants to recall that the forest-based value chain represents the most advanced and scalable foundation of the global bioeconomy. Through sustainably managed forests and efficient circular use of biomass, the sector delivers renewable materials, carbon storage and material substitution, biodiversity co-benefits, and quality employment, particularly in rural areas. Recognizing and strengthening the role of the forest-based value chain is essential if bioeconomy strategies are to move beyond ambition and deliver tangible results. So tomorrow the statement will be released. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this announcement. We are looking forward for this release and for supporting our activities here at the summit. Thank you very much.
Okay, I do not see any other hand from the floor, so I can then safely say that we can officially close the session. I think the announcements have been done for tomorrow. Just a reminder of the side event that's happening right now. That's going to start immediately when we finish. And then the rest of the information, as indicated, you will receive via email. Tomorrow, I think the starting time is 9:30. And do not forget also that we're also doing the field visits. So have a good evening and see you tomorrow.